She almost did not go that night. The invitation had been sitting on her phone for 5 days, a rooftop gathering at a friend of a friend's apartment in the middle of the city. Claire Lawson had read the message 3 times, typed out 2 different excuses, deleted both, and then left the phone face down on her kitchen counter while she made herself a cup of tea she did not drink. She was 27 years old, she had work in the morning, and she was tired in the particular way that had nothing to do with sleep. The kind of tired that lived behind the eyes and in the shoulders and did not go away even after a full night in bed. Her friend Nina called at 7:30. "You are coming," Nina said. It was not a question. "I have an early meeting." "You said that last time and you came. Last time I regretted it. You met Marcus last time. Marcus gave me his number and then texted me a photo of his cat for 3 weeks, without asking a single question about me." Nina laughed. "This will be different. Come for 1 hour. If you hate it, I will personally walk you to your car." Claire looked at the cup of cold tea on her counter. She looked at the stack of unread books on her coffee table. She looked at the window, where the city outside was already glowing in the early autumn dark, lights stacking up against each other, the way they always did from her apartment on the 4th floor. A view that was supposed to feel exciting and still, after 2 years, made her feel faintly lonely in a way she could not name. 1 hour, she said. She wore a dark green dress she had not worn since the previous spring, and fixed her hair without looking at her reflection for too long. She had learned, somewhere around 24, after the end of a relationship that had taken more from her than it had given, that looking at herself in the mirror before going out to places where she did not feel fully comfortable was not a useful activity. She would find things to pick at. She would stand there rearranging herself until the point where she was almost certain she looked presentable, and then notice one thing, and then another, and then it would be 9 o'clock and the moment would have passed. She caught a ride to the building on Ashfield Lane. The lobby had a doorman who smiled at her and called the elevator without being asked. The ride up was quick. The sound of people talking and music playing reached her through the elevator doors before they opened. The rooftop was fuller than she expected. 30 people, maybe more, clustered in the kinds of small groups that form when people are at a party where they know some of the guests but not all of them. The city spread out in every direction, orange and silver. The sky above it that particular dark blue that only existed for about 20 minutes each evening before it went fully black. There were string lights overhead, and a table with drinks, and a group of men near the north railing who were laughing loudly at something. Nina appeared from the direction of the drinks table and pressed a glass of something cold into Claire's hand. "You look great," Nina said. "See? This was a good idea." "Ask me again in an hour," Claire said. She meant it mildly. She was not in a bad mood. She was just in that careful, slightly guarded state she often occupied at the beginning of gatherings, a state that required her to warm up slowly, to find her footing, to locate the 1 or 2 people in the room she might genuinely want to talk to. She had always been like this. Her mother called it thoughtfulness. An ex-boyfriend had called it standoffishness. She thought it was just the way she was built. She talked with Nina for a while. She talked with a woman named Diane who worked in publishing and had opinions about a book Claire had read the previous year, and had not found anyone to discuss with since. That conversation was good. That was the kind of conversation that made going to places worth it. Claire's shoulders dropped a little. She finished her drink. She stopped checking the time. It was during the conversation with Diane that she became aware of being watched. It was not the feeling of someone glancing at her the way people glanced at each other at parties. It was something more sustained than that. A steady, deliberate attention that she felt before she located the source of it. She had experienced that sensation before. Most women had, and it was usually uncomfortable. Usually, when she traced it back to its origin, she found something that made her want to create distance. She turned, slowly, because she did not want to seem startled, and she found him on the other side of the rooftop. He was standing with a group of 3 other men, holding a glass, and he was not talking. The other men were talking. One of them was in the middle of some story that required expansive gesturing, but the man who was watching her had stepped slightly back from the circle in a way that was so subtle you would not have noticed unless you were looking directly at him. He was tall. He had the kind of face that was arranged with care, all clean angles and a jaw that caught the string light at a particular angle. He was wearing a dark jacket over a white shirt, open at the collar, and he looked like someone who was used to being the most composed person in any room he walked into. He did not look away when she caught him watching. Most people looked away. Most people had the reflexive social instinct to break eye contact when they were caught, to look at the floor, or the sky, or their drink. He did not do any of those things. He held her gaze for 2 full seconds. She counted, without meaning to. And then he gave her the smallest, most controlled smile she had ever seen on a person's face. Not a grin, not a leer, just an acknowledgement. and I see you, that was also, somehow, a you interest me. She turned back to Diane. Who is that? She asked, keeping her voice very even. Diane glanced. Damien Carver. He works in acquisitions. Property, I think. Or investments. Something like that. He comes to these things sometimes. She paused. He is very charming. Is he? In the way that makes you want to be careful, Diane said, and then she continued talking about the book, and Claire let her, because she did not want to keep asking questions about a man she had not spoken to. But she was aware of him for the rest of the evening in the way that you are aware of something bright in your peripheral vision. She did not seek him out. She circulated. She found a quiet man named Owen who worked in architecture, and they discussed urban planning for 20 minutes in a way that was genuinely pleasant. She helped Nina locate her coat. She laughed at something that was actually funny. And then, near the end of the evening, when she was on her way to say goodbye to the host, she came around a corner and almost walked directly into Damien Carver. He was there suddenly, or she was there suddenly, and there was barely a foot of space between them. She stopped. He stopped. Up close he was even more arresting, which she registered with a kind of detached awareness, the way you might note that a piece of architecture is beautiful, without deciding to do anything about it. I have been waiting to speak to you all evening, he said. His voice was low and even, and very calm. You did not introduce yourself, she said. I know. I was watching how you moved through the room first. It was an odd thing to say. It was the kind of honesty that bordered on strange, but it did not feel threatening in the moment. It felt, against her better instincts, like a compliment of an unusual kind, like he was telling her that he had found her worth studying. And, she said, you know who you like, he said. You spent 8 minutes with the woman in the green scarf, and 8 minutes with the man near the railing, and 20 with the woman in glasses. Everyone else got less. She stared at him. You counted. I noticed, he said. There is a difference. She did not know what to say to that. She was not accustomed to being observed with that level of attention by a stranger. It unsettled her, but she could not, in that moment, determine whether what she felt was discomfort or something else entirely. I'm Claire, she said. I know, he said. Damien. They shook hands. His grip was firm and brief. He asked her what she did, and she told him, and he listened in the way that very few people at parties listened, without looking past her shoulder, without preparing his next sentence while she was still speaking. He asked a follow-up question that showed he had actually heard her. She answered it. He asked another. She stayed for 20 more minutes past the hour she had promised Nina. In the car on the way home, Nina looked at her with a specific expression. Don't, Claire said. I am not making any decisions. I spoke to him for 20 minutes. You looked like you were listening very hard. I was being polite. Nina said nothing else. She looked out the window. The city moved past them, and Claire leaned her head back against the seat and looked at the ceiling of the car and thought about the way Damien Carver had not looked away when she caught him watching, about the particular quality of his attention, about how strange it was to meet someone and feel, against all logic, that they had already formed an opinion of you, a detailed, considered opinion, before you had even spoken. She told herself it was interesting in the abstract, a personality type she had not encountered before, a social skill she could not quite categorize. She got home. She changed. She brushed her teeth. She got into bed and turned the light off. Her phone buzzed. She assumed it was Nina, or her mother, or a notification from an app she had forgotten to silence. It was a follow request on Instagram from an account she did not recognize. The profile photo was small on her screen, but she could see enough. The name read, Damien Carver. She stared at the screen in the dark. He had found her within 48 minutes of meeting her. He had not asked for her handle. She had not given it to him. He had looked her up, found her, and sent a request within less time than it took most people to get home from a party. She should have found it unsettling. She would think about this later, how it sat with her in that moment, how she turned it over, how she considered it from different angles before landing on the interpretation that felt most convenient. She told herself he was simply direct, efficient, the kind of person who, when interested in something, moved toward it without hesitation. She accepted the request. She put her phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the dark for a long time before she slept. The message came the following morning, while she was on the train to work, standing with her coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, pressed against the morning crowd. It said, I looked up what you do. It's more interesting than most people realize. I hope you know that. She read it twice. She did not respond immediately. She let it sit until her lunch break, when she carried her sandwich to the small courtyard behind her office building, and sat on the bench under the plane tree and typed, "Most people need it explained to them before they see it." His response came in 4 minutes. "That's the part that would frustrate me. You shouldn't have to explain something that's already visible if you're paying attention." She read that sentence 3 times. She thought about it on the walk back to her office. She thought about it during her 2 o'clock meeting, in the margins of her notes where she was supposed to be writing action items. She thought about how rarely anyone at all, had said anything to her that felt like it had been specifically made for her, rather than assembled from the general vocabulary of flattery and recycled charm. That was what she told herself later, when she was trying to understand how it started, that it had felt specific, that it had felt, against all of her carefully constructed skepticism, like he was paying attention to the actual her, not the version of her that was easy to see, but the one underneath it. She responded again that evening. He responded within minutes. They talked until almost midnight. In the morning, when she woke up, she reached for her phone before she reached for the glass of water on her nightstand. That was the first thing she noticed, later, that she should have paid more attention to at the time. The reaching. The wanting to know if there was something from him waiting for her in the dark of the early morning. There was. "Good morning," it said. "I was thinking about something you said last night. Tell me more about it when you have time." She smiled at her phone in the half-dark of her bedroom. She had not smiled at her phone like that in a very long time. She lay there for a moment in the warmth of it before she got up and went to make her coffee and begin the ordinary machinery of her day. She told herself she was simply enjoying a good conversation. She told herself that twice. Nina called that Sunday. They had brunch, like they always did, at the place with the good eggs on the corner of Fairview and 2nd. Nina ordered her usual. Claire ordered hers. The waiter left. Nina looked at Claire in the way she had been looking at her for 15 years, which was with the particular directness of someone who had decided long ago that there was no point in approaching things indirectly. "You look different," Nina said. "I look the same. You look like you are thinking about someone." Claire looked at the menu even though she already knew what she was having. "We have been talking," she said. "Just talking." "About what?" "Everything, honestly. Work, books, the city." He asks questions that are... She paused. She was trying to find the right word, and the right word kept sliding away from her. "Specific," she finally said. "Specific how?" Like he actually wants to know the answer, not just to have something to say back. Nina was quiet for a moment. She turned her coffee cup in a circle, which was something she did when she was deciding how to say something. "Diane mentioned him again," she said. "Did she?" "She said he has a way of making women feel chosen." Claire set the menu down. "That sounds like a criticism." She meant it as a warning. "She does not know him." "Neither do you," Nina said. Then she softened, because she had known Claire long enough to know when to soften. "I am just saying, be a little slow, that is all." Claire nodded. She looked out the window. The Sunday morning street was quiet, just a few people walking dogs, the light coming in flat and golden across the sidewalk. She thought about what Nina had said. She thought about the word chosen and why it had felt, for 1/2 a second, like something to want. The eggs arrived. They ate. They talked about other things, and Claire was careful, for the rest of the meal, not to check her phone. She checked it in the car on the way home. There was a message from Damien. It said, "I keep thinking about what you said about the way cities change at night. I want to show you something this week. Are you free Thursday?" She sat in the parking lot outside her apartment building with the engine off, reading the message. The October air was starting to bite. Through the windshield, the sky was the kind of pale silver that meant rain by the afternoon. She thought about what Nina had said. She thought about what Diane had said. She thought about the way he had not looked away. She typed, "Thursday works." She got out of the car. She did not notice, in that moment, that she had made the decision without a single hesitation. She was tired in a way she could not explain to anyone, and there was something about him, about the precision of his attention, the quality of the way he listened, that made the tiredness lift, just slightly, for the hours when she was talking to him. She was experienced enough to know that this was a feeling to be careful around. She was smart enough to have that knowledge. The difficulty, the thing that would take her a long time to understand, was that knowing a thing and acting on that knowledge were two entirely different operations, separated by a distance that sometimes felt like miles, and sometimes felt like nothing at all. She went inside. She made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window and looked out at the city below, which was doing what cities did, carrying its ordinary load of people and noise and motion, utterly indifferent to any single person's decisions. And she thought, Thursday. And she felt, for the first time in a long time, that she had something to look forward to. That feeling, she would later understand, had been the point. That feeling had been, from the very beginning, exactly what he had been building toward. She did not know this yet. She stood at her window and drank her coffee and watched the rain begin. Thursday came the way days come when you have been half dreading and half wanting them, too quickly and with not enough warning. Claire changed her outfit twice before she settled on the gray coat over a simple navy top and dark trousers. She stood in front of the mirror long enough to make a decision and then deliberately turned away from it. He picked her up at 7, which was precise. Not 6:58, not 7:03. 7 exactly. She was watching from her window and she saw the car pull up and she counted to 30 before she went downstairs, because she was not the kind of woman who ran to the door. He was standing outside the car when she came out, not sitting in it waiting. Standing, in the cold, with his hands in the pockets of a dark coat, watching the entrance of her building. He saw her come through the door and he did not smile immediately. He looked at her for one full second, the same way he had looked at her on the rooftop, as if he was confirming something, and then he smiled. "You look cold already," he said. "Good. Where I'm taking you, you'll want to be. Where are you taking me?" "You'll see in 8 minutes." She got in the car. It was clean and quiet inside. He drove with one hand on the wheel and he did not fill the silence with noise, which was something she noticed. Most people, when they were nervous or trying to impress, talk too much. He did not. He navigated through the evening traffic with an ease that suggested he had made peace with the city a long time ago, and he only spoke to ask her about her day, and when she told him about a frustrating meeting, he said nothing sympathetic or performative. He simply asked one question, one very specific question, that showed he understood the actual problem rather than the surface of it. 8 minutes later, he parked on a narrow street she did not recognize, near the edge of a district she did not visit often. He led her through a side gate and up a short flight of external stairs, stone, old, worn smooth at the center, and they came out onto a wide terrace, at the top of a building she could not identify. Below them, the city folded out in every direction. But the terrace faced east, toward the old quarter, and at this hour the lights there did something particular. The narrow streets lit from below, the old stonework catching orange at the edges, the whole district looking, from here, as if it was slightly on fire in the most beautiful, controlled way. She stood at the railing and looked at it. "I told you," he said. "How did you find this?" "I spend a lot of time looking at buildings from the outside and imagining what they look like from the inside," he said. "And from the top, it's a professional habit that occasionally makes me useful in other ways." She laughed. It was a real laugh, not a polite one. They stayed on that terrace for nearly 2 hours. They talked the way she had always wanted to talk with someone, not with the polished, careful speech of people performing compatibility, but with the slightly rough-edged, honest speech of people who had dropped the performance without agreeing to. He told her about his work with the kind of frankness she found rare in men who were successful. He named things that had gone wrong, projects that had taught him something painful, decisions he had made for the wrong reasons and recognized too late. She matched him. She told him things she did not usually tell people in the early stages of knowing them. She talked about a choice she had made at 24 that had cost her something she still thought about. He listened with his full face, not just his ears. He did not offer advice. He did not try to fix anything. He just stayed in it with her, present and unhurried. Walking back to the car, their arms brushed once, and he did not reach for her hand or make anything of it. He just walked beside her at the same pace. That restraint, the absence of a grab or a lean, registered somewhere in her chest in a way she recognized and was careful about. He dropped her at her building. She thanked him. He said he would be in touch. He drove away before she had finished letting herself back inside. She closed the door to her apartment and stood in the hallway with her coat still on for a moment. He was good at this. She was aware that he was good at this. She was also aware that awareness was not the same as immunity. She hung up her coat and went to bed. The second week was different from the first in a way that was hard to name. The messages between them became denser, more frequent. He would send her something in the morning, an article about something she had mentioned, a photograph of a building, a question, and she would respond, and they would be back and forth for 20 minutes before either of them had to stop and return to their actual lives. She started keeping her phone closer. She started noticing when it had been longer than usual since he had written. The second time they went out, he took her to a small restaurant she had never heard of, that had no sign outside, and 8 tables, and a chef who changed the menu every evening based on what had come in from the market. It was the kind of place that required someone to know about it, and he knew about it, and the evening was extraordinary. The food, the conversation, the particular ease that had begun to develop between them, a shorthand forming that they both recognized. She reached for the bill when it came. He put his hand flat over hers, not gripping, just covering, and said, "Next time." She let him take it. She told herself she would get the next one. There was something she kept noticing. Across the third week of knowing him, across the dinners and the long evening calls and the back-and-forth messages, she kept noticing the way he created certain moments, a pause before he answered a question she had not expected him to answer honestly. A small observation about something she had mentioned in passing 2 conversations ago, offered as proof that he remembered, that he kept everything she told him. A way of looking at her in public spaces, restaurants, streets, that suggested she was the most interesting thing in his environment. It was all done with such lightness, such apparent effortlessness, that it was difficult to identify it as construction. It simply felt like attention. But it was attention of a very specific kind. It was attention designed to create a particular hunger. She recognized this. Intellectually, the way you can recognize the mechanics of a magic trick even as you watch it and are still, despite knowing, slightly fooled. At the end of the 3rd week, Nina came over for dinner. Claire made pasta. Nina brought wine. They sat at the kitchen table the way they always had, and at some point in the evening Nina put her fork down and looked at Claire with the directness that was her particular gift. "You are different," Nina said. "You said that at brunch. I mean different in a new way. At brunch you looked excited. Now you look," she searched for the word, "tuned into something. Like you're listening for a sound." Claire turned her wine glass in her fingers. "He is not predictable," she said. "You never quite know what he will say. Or when. Is that a good thing?" "I do not know yet." "Did you tell him that?" "Tell him what?" "That you do not know yet." "No. Why not?" Claire thought about it. "Because I do not want to sound like I'm analyzing him." "You are analyzing him." "I know. I just don't want him to know that." Nina was quiet. She ate a piece of pasta. Then she said, "I want you to hear this, and not dismiss it because I am your friend, and not because you think I am being paranoid." She waited until Claire nodded. "Diane told me that a woman named Caroline, she was at the rooftop that night, you probably didn't meet her, was involved with Damien Carver for about 7 months, 3 years ago, and that at the end of it she was very," Nina chose the word carefully, "depleted." "Depleted." That was the word Diane used. Claire said nothing. "I don't know what happened," Nina said. "I don't want to tell you something specific because I do not know anything specific. I'm just telling you what was said." Claire looked at her pasta. She thought about the terrace above the old quarter, and the restaurant with no sign, and the way he had put his hand flat over hers at the bill, not gripping, just covering. She thought about the word depleted. She turned it over. "I will be careful," she said. Nina looked at her with an expression that was very quiet and very old between them. "Okay," she said. They talked about other things. They finished the wine. Nina left at 10:30. Claire washed the dishes. She dried them. She put them away. She went to her bedroom and sat on the edge of her bed and picked up her phone, and there was, as there always seemed to be at exactly the right moment, a message from Damien. It said, "I've been thinking about you all evening. What are you doing right now?" She held the phone and thought about Caroline, a woman she had never met, and the word depleted. She thought about Nina's face when she had said, "Okay." She thought about the way she had told herself, after every dinner, every call, every message, that she was going in with her eyes open, that she was in control of the pace of this, that she was too experienced and too careful to be caught off guard. She typed, thinking, "What about you?" His response came immediately. She was still sitting on the edge of the bed, leaning toward the screen, when she realized that 40 minutes had passed without her noticing. She had not turned the light on. The room had gone dark around her while she had been in the bright, narrow tunnel of the conversation, and she had not noticed until now. She turned the lamp on. She sat in the light for a moment and breathed. Then she typed one more response and set the phone face down on the nightstand. She told herself, "I will slow down tomorrow." She told herself she meant it. But the next morning he sent her a photograph, a view from a building he was visiting for work. The city spread below in a way that was almost identical to the terrace he had taken her to. And he had written, "Made me think of Thursday." And she had picked up the phone and begun typing before she had finished her first sip of coffee. The 4th week brought a change she did not register until it was already established. He stopped initiating contact quite as frequently. Where he had been consistent before, morning messages, evening calls, there were now gaps. A morning where nothing came, a call that he had to cut short, an evening where he said he was busy, and she found herself staring at her phone in a way that she did not like, waiting for a message that did not come until the following afternoon. When it did come, it was warm and detailed and specific, and it erased the preceding silence so completely that she did not bring up the silence. She filed it away. She told herself it was normal. People got busy. The rhythm of new things was never perfectly even. But she noticed that in the days that followed, she rearranged small parts of her schedule without quite deciding to. She left her phone volume on at night. She found herself, in meetings, with a corner of her mind allocated to the question of whether there was something from him that she had not yet seen. She was not accustomed to this. She was not the kind of person who lost the thread of herself in the early stages of something new. She was the kind of person who had always known where her feet were. She mentioned none of this to Nina. She mentioned none of it to herself, directly. She went on behaving as though everything was proceeding at exactly the pace she had chosen. 6 weeks after the rooftop, he kissed her goodnight at the bottom of the stairs outside her building. It was brief and entirely without drama. He pulled back and looked at her with that same controlled expression, and then said goodnight, and walked to his car and left. She went inside. She stood in the elevator. She thought, I am in trouble. Not in a frightened way. Not in the way that meant danger. In the way that meant she had let herself care about something before she had quite decided to, and now the caring was already there, already real, already something she would have to reckon with. She had not meant to let it happen this quickly. She had not meant to let it happen at all without more deliberate permission. But the thing about the way he operated, the thing she would understand much later, when she had the distance and the clarity and the very expensive therapy sessions to help her see it, was that he had not asked for her permission. He had not taken anything directly. He had simply created a series of conditions under which she had given things to him without realizing she was giving, because the giving had always felt like her own choice. It had always felt like her own idea. That was the design. She did not see it yet. She got into her apartment and locked the door and stood for a moment in the quiet of her own home. She was Claire Lawson. She was 27 years old. She was careful and thoughtful and not easily moved. She had her own life, her own work, her own understanding of herself. She had not lost any of that. She told herself, everything is fine, I will handle this. She was right that she would handle it. She was wrong about how. She was wrong about who would come out of it depleted. The word arrived in her mind again, small and precise. Depleted. She felt it now the way you feel a word when it lands on something true, with a faint recognition, a slight tightening somewhere in the chest. But she pushed it down. She went to bed. She reached for her phone. She put it down. She reached for it again. And in the morning, everything began again. The first time she told him she needed space, it was on a Wednesday afternoon in November, 7 weeks after they had met. She had thought about how to say it for 3 days. She had written and deleted drafts. She had called Nina and talked around it for 20 minutes without saying the actual thing she needed to say. In the end, she sent a message that was calm and kind and honest. She liked what they had been building, and she did not want to rush it, and she needed a little room to think. He responded 4 hours later. She had sat with her phone in her hand for those 4 hours, rearranging her afternoon around the waiting, canceling a gym session she had been looking forward to, reheating her coffee twice without drinking it. She told herself she was not waiting. She made a grocery list. She stared at the grocery list without reading it. His response, when it came, was 3 lines long. I understand. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here. That was all. No hurt, no argument, no attempt to negotiate the terms of her request. Just those 3 lines, clean and unhurried. She had expected, she realized only after reading it, something with more friction. Something that would have given her something to push against. The absence of friction was disorienting in a way she could not immediately name. She put the phone down. She tried to enjoy the space she had asked for. The space lasted 4 days. Not because he had broken it. He did not call. He did not send unnecessary messages. He held precisely the distance she had asked for, which was its own kind of pressure, because in the quiet of his absence she found that she kept thinking about him anyway. The space she had carved out was supposed to give her clarity. Instead, it gave her restlessness. She kept her phone face up. She found herself, while working, mentally rehearsing what she might say when she broke the silence. She thought about the terrace. She thought about the restaurant with no sign. She thought about the kiss at the bottom of the stairs, brief and entirely without drama. On the 4th evening, she sent him a message. He responded in minutes, as if he had simply been waiting nearby. Not impatiently, not with any urgency, just present, available. The conversation picked up exactly where it had left off, and within 30 minutes it was as if the 4 days had not happened. He did not mention the space she had asked for. He did not reference it at all. There was no discussion of what it had meant or what they were now. She did not bring it up either. She told herself this was healthy, that it meant neither of them was going to overanalyze things, that the ease of returning was a sign of something good. November moved into December, and the shape of things between them shifted in ways that were difficult to isolate. He called more in the evenings, and the calls lasted longer, and they had the quality of something essential. She found herself waiting for them the way she had once waited for the end of the working day, when she had something good to go home to. She began to time her evenings around the calls without quite deciding to. She declined 2 separate invitations, one from a colleague, one from a group she had been part of for years, in weeks when she knew they would overlap. She told herself she was making a choice. That choosing one thing over another was simply the arithmetic of a life with finite hours. She called her sister Lucy on a Saturday morning in December. Lucy was 32 and lived with her husband and their 2 children in a house outside the city, and she had always been the person in Claire's life who said the thing directly, without softening at first. "How are you really doing?" Lucy asked, because that was always how Lucy opened these conversations. "Good," Claire said. "There is someone." A pause. "Tell me." Claire told her, and as she talked she noticed that she was selecting the good parts. The terrace, the restaurant, the specificity of his attention, and setting aside the other parts. The 4-day space that had resolved itself without resolution. The way she had rearranged her evenings. The fact that she had not mentioned him to their mother yet, which was not, she told herself, because she was uncertain, but simply because she was private. "He sounds very focused on you," Lucy said when she had finished. "Yes, that's a good way to put it." "Is it? What do you mean?" Lucy was quiet for a moment. "When someone is very focused on you very quickly," she said, "it can feel like a gift, and sometimes it is. But sometimes the focus is not really about you. Sometimes it is about what they are trying to do." "You sound like you're quoting something." "I am quoting my own experience," Lucy said, "and the experience of a few women I know. I am not saying anything is wrong. I am saying, pay attention to how you feel about yourself when you are with him. Not how you feel about him, how you feel about you." Claire was standing in her kitchen with her coffee. She looked at the wall. She thought about the question. How did she feel about herself when she was with him? Sharper, she thought. More visible. Like the parts of herself she most liked, the intelligent parts, the curious parts, the parts that had opinions and noticed things, were being illuminated rather than overlooked. She told Lucy this. Lucy said, "Good, I hope it stays that way." They talked for another 20 minutes about their mother's plans for Christmas and Lucy's youngest, and a trip Lucy was planning for the spring. When she hung up, Claire stood in her kitchen for a while before she picked up the glass of orange juice she had poured before she called. She thought about the question. How do you feel about yourself when you are with him? She still thought the answer was sharp, more visible, better. She did not yet know that the answer would change. The change began so gradually that she could not point to the day it started. In January, she and Damien had been involved for 3 months, though they had never used a specific word for what they were, which she had told herself did not matter, and which Nina had told her, gently, probably did. The days had a texture now that was built around him. She was aware of this, but she framed it, consistently, as chosen, as something she had decided. In January, a woman named Ruth, someone Claire had worked with years before, who had reconnected with her at a mutual friend's birthday, asked her to come to an art exhibition on a Thursday evening. Claire had looked at her calendar. She had nothing scheduled. Damien had mentioned nothing about Thursday. She said yes, and it was only later, after she had confirmed the plan, that she felt the small pull of anxiety, the thought that he might call that evening, that she might miss his call, that the evening would be lost from the rhythm of communication between them. She went to the exhibition. She had a good time. Damien did not call. But she checked her phone 4 times during the first hour of the event, in the gaps between looking at paintings, when Ruth had moved slightly ahead in the gallery. She noticed herself doing this. She was not proud of it. He called the next day. The conversation was warm and easy. He asked about the exhibition, because she had mentioned it, and he listened to what she said about it, and it was fine. Everything was fine. But she carried the memory of those 4 phone checks with her into the following week. She did not tell anyone about it. In February, he went away for work for 10 days. He called twice during those 10 days, which was less than she had expected. The calls were brief. He was tired, he said. The project was demanding. She said she understood. She did. She also lay awake on the 5th night, unable to fall asleep, and could not fully identify why. He came back and took her to dinner, and was the version of himself she loved best, fully present, fully engaged, asking her about her week with the kind of detail that made her feel that the 10 days had not created any distance at all. She left the restaurant feeling that she had been overreacting, that the sleeplessness had been her own anxiety, nothing more. She began to notice, somewhere around March, that she was doing a kind of internal accounting she had never done before. She was tracking, without meaning to, without any formal decision, the ratio of his investment to hers, the calls he initiated versus the ones she initiated, the evenings he planned versus the ones she suggested and he agreed to or declined. She was not a person who tracked things. She had prided herself, in previous relationships and in her general approach to life, on not keeping score. Scorekeeping, she had always believed, was a sign that something was already not right. She noticed the accounting. She did not like what it told her. One evening in March, she sat across from him at the kitchen table in his apartment. She had been to his apartment 4 times by then, and he had never been to hers, which was something she had not tracked until now. And she looked at him while he was reading something on his phone, not looking up, and she thought, I am afraid to tell you that I would like more. She turned the thought over. She was afraid, that was the word. She was afraid that asking for more would produce the 4-day silence, that requesting would create a distance that she would then spend her energy closing, that he held something in the architecture of what they had built, some central piece that only he could remove, and that if she said the wrong thing she would feel it go. This was not a new thought. She had had versions of it before, but it was the first time she named it clearly to herself. Afraid. And she sat with the naming of it for a while, because she was honest with herself, even when she was not quite ready to be honest out loud. She looked at him on the other side of the table. She thought about the terrace and the restaurant and the 4-day space that had resolved without resolution, and the 10 days away with 2 brief calls, and the evenings she had rearranged, and the plans she had declined, and the phone she had checked 4 times in an art gallery, while Ruth moved ahead of her between paintings. She thought about Lucy's question, how do you feel about yourself when you are with him? She thought, less sure than I used to be. She thought, smaller in a way I cannot locate. She did not say any of this. He looked up from his phone and smiled at her, and the smile was warm and genuine and landed on her in the way that his smiles always did, with a weight that felt like value, like being worth something. She smiled back. She got up to make tea, and while the kettle boiled she stood at his kitchen window and watched the street below and felt the gap between what she knew and what she was doing, and she held it there in her chest like a small stone, and she did not yet decide what to do with it. In April, a friend of hers named Patrick, someone she had known since university, one of those friendships that persisted through years and distance, and the gradual divergence of lives without losing its core, noticed something at a dinner he hosted. He pulled her aside afterward, while others were getting their coats, and said very quietly, "Is everything okay with you? You seem like you're somewhere else tonight." "I'm here," she said. "Your phone was on the table during dinner," he said. "You haven't done that in the 5 years I've known you." She looked at him. Patrick was a tall, gentle man who had no interest in being right about things, which was exactly why she listened when he was. "I've been a little preoccupied," she said. "With what?" She hesitated. "Or with who?" he said. She looked at the floor. "It's complicated. Most things that make you disappear inside yourself are." He said nothing else. He helped her with her coat. He hugged her at the door and told her to call him, and she said she would, and she meant it. She called him 10 days later. She told him about Damien, all of it, the rooftop, the terrace, the quality of his attention at the beginning, and then the shape of things now, the accounting, the fear, the way she had begun to feel like someone who was always slightly off balance. She told him about the 4 phone checks at the art gallery and the sleepless night in February, and the way she had sat across the kitchen table, unable to ask for what she wanted. Patrick listened through all of it without speaking. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet. Then he said, "You have been editing yourself." "What?" "Since January, from what you're describing. You have been choosing your words carefully. You have been calculating how to need things. You have been afraid that needing something will cost you something. That is not what a person does in something healthy. That is what a person does in something that is making them smaller." She held the phone and said nothing. "I'm not telling you what to do," Patrick said. "You are one of the most capable people I know. I'm just telling you what I hear." She said goodbye. She sat in her apartment in the early evening. The city outside was moving through April with its usual indifference. She sat for a long time, and let what Patrick had said settle through her. Editing herself. She tried to remember the last time she had told Damien something she actually wanted, without first checking whether it was safe to want it. She could not find it. She had been calculating. She had been performing a version of herself, the easy version, the available version, the version that did not need too much, and she had done it for so long and so automatically that she had stopped noticing she was doing it. She thought about the Claire Lawson who had stood at the door of the rooftop gathering on Ashfield Lane, and looked at the city spread out in every direction. That woman had known what she liked and moved toward it, and moved away from what she didn't. She had spent 8 minutes with one person, and 20 with another, and less than 3 with anyone who didn't hold her interest. She had been, in that moment, completely and unself-consciously herself. She thought about the woman who had checked her phone 4 times in an art gallery. They were the same person. Something had happened between one and the other. She made a decision. She called Damien and said she needed to talk. He came over 3 days later, on a Thursday evening, and she sat across from him on her own sofa in her own apartment, and she said, clearly and without apology, that she needed more consistency, that the gaps were hard for her, that she wanted them to talk about what they were and where this was going. He listened to all of it. He was calm. His face did not change. When she finished, he reached across and put his hand over hers, not gripping, just covering, exactly the way he had done at the restaurant table months before. And he said, I hear you, and I'm glad you told me. He said more than that. He said all the right things. He said that he wanted to be more consistent, that he had not realized how the gaps had landed, that this, meaning her, meaning them, was important to him. She felt something unclench in her chest that had been tight for weeks. She believed him. She would not realize, for another 2 months, that he had said all of the right things and changed none of the actual patterns, that the hand over hers was the same gesture, that the calm was the same calm, that she had just shown him exactly what she needed and exactly how much she was willing to give in order to try to get it. And he had noted it. He had noted all of it. She ended it on a Tuesday in June. She had prepared for 3 weeks. She had spoken to Patrick twice, and to Nina once, and to Lucy on the phone for nearly an hour on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in her living room with the windows open and the early summer air coming in, quiet and direct and resolute about her decision, in a way she had not been about anything in months. That resolution felt like something returning to her, something she had not realized was missing until it showed up again. She did not go to his apartment to do it, Nina had said, and Lucy had agreed, and Patrick had simply said without elaboration, don't do it in person. She did not fully understand the reasoning at the time. She understood later. She called him on a Tuesday at 7 in the evening. He picked up on the second ring. She had rehearsed the words, but she did not use the rehearsed version. What she said came out differently, simpler, more honest. She said that she cared about him, but that what was between them was not working for her, that she had tried to say this before, in different ways, and that the patterns had not changed, and that she was not angry but she needed to stop. She said it was her decision and it was final. He was very quiet through it. When she finished, there was a pause of maybe 5 seconds. Then he said, okay. 1 word. Just that. His voice was entirely level. She waited for more. There was nothing more. Okay, she said. Take care of yourself. You too, he said. She ended the call. She sat on her sofa in the quiet of her apartment and felt something she had not expected. Not relief, not immediately, but an absence. Like a sound you have grown so accustomed to that you do not notice it until the room goes silent, and then the silence itself is enormous. She sat in it for a while. Then she made dinner. She called Lucy. She went to bed at a reasonable hour. She told herself the worst was over. She woke at 2 in the morning to 41 messages. She had not expected this. The call had been so quiet, his single word so level, that she had assumed, in the way that you assume things when someone presents you with calm, that he had accepted it. That whatever his feelings were, he would process them privately, the way he seemed to process everything, with control, with composure, without anything spilling over. But there they were, 41 messages, time-stamped from 9 in the evening through 1:47 in the morning. She scrolled through them in the dark of her bedroom, the screen too bright for the hour. The first 12 were apologies, detailed, specific, naming things he had done that had hurt her, demonstrating a clarity of self-awareness that felt, at that hour, almost eerie. He knew exactly what he had done. He had, apparently, always known. The next 10 were questions. Why had she not given him another chance? Had he not been worth more than a phone call? After everything they had been through, did she not owe him a conversation face to face? The following 8 shifted. The tone changed. He was hurt. She was being cold. She was making a decision that she would regret, and she was making it from fear, not wisdom. And he knew her well enough to know the difference. The final 11 were something else. They swung between softness and hardness in a way that was difficult to read in sequence, like 2 different people had been writing them. In one message he said he missed her. In the next he said she was running from the best thing that had ever happened to her. In the one after that he said he hoped she found what she was looking for. In the one after that, he said he did not believe she actually wanted this. She read all of them. She put her phone face down. She lay in the dark for a long time. In the morning, she did not respond. She went to work. She came home. There were 7 more messages. She did not respond to those either. On Thursday evening, her phone rang, not a text. The actual phone ringing, his name appearing on the screen, the particular vibration of a call that was more demanding than a message, that required an active choice to ignore, rather than a passive one. She sent it to voicemail. It rang again 12 minutes later. She sent it to voicemail again. There were voicemails. She listened to the first one. His voice was controlled and quiet. He said he just needed 5 minutes, that he had things he needed to say in person, that he was not going to accept this as the end without having a real conversation. She did not call back. She called Patrick that evening and told him about the messages and the calls. Patrick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do not respond to any of it. Not one thing. Even a message that says leave me alone is a response. Don't." He said he needs 5 minutes. "That's not a request," Patrick said. "That's a negotiation. He is negotiating to get you back in the room with him." She thought about this. "He sounds different," she said. "Different how?" She tried to find the word. "More open, more willing to say what is actually happening with him, more like the person I wanted him to be at the beginning." Patrick was very quiet for a second. Then he said, gently and very clearly, "That is the most dangerous version of this. Not the anger. The version where he becomes what you wanted. That is the one you have to be most careful of." She did not understand fully what he meant right then. She would understand it within 2 weeks. By the end of the second week after the Tuesday call, he had called her work line. She did not know how he had gotten it. She had never given it to him. Her assistant mentioned it, that a Damien Carver had called and left a message asking Claire to call him back at her convenience. Her assistant's expression was professionally neutral, but there was something underneath the neutrality that Claire clocked. A slight hesitation, a held breath. She thanked her assistant and went into her office and closed the door. She sat behind her desk and felt something she recognized and did not like recognizing. It was a feeling she had last had at 24, in a different context, in a different story, and she had promised herself she would never be back in this particular neighborhood of a feeling again. She called Nina. Nina answered immediately, because she always answered immediately when the call came from Claire's work number. "He called my office," Claire said. Nina said nothing for a moment. Then, "Call someone. A professional. Someone who can tell you what your options are. It has been 2 weeks. That is not the relevant measurement." Claire called the number on Friday. The woman on the other end of the line had a calm, practiced voice and asked a series of questions that Claire answered in the clinical way that you answer clinical questions. From a remove, with precision, as if you are describing someone else's situation. When she was done, the woman outlined what Claire's options were at this stage. She listened carefully. She thanked the woman. She hung up and sat in her car in the parking lot of her office for 23 minutes before she drove home. He appeared outside her gym on a Saturday morning. She came out at 7:40, her bag over her shoulder, into the pale, early light, and he was there on the pavement across the street, not hiding, not approaching, just standing. He was dressed neatly, his hands in his pockets, and he looked, from that distance, like someone who was simply waiting for a bus. She stopped moving for 1 second. Then she kept walking. She did not look at him again. She got to her car, which was parked 3 streets away, and she sat in it with the doors locked and her hands on the steering wheel, and she breathed very steadily and evenly for the 2 minutes it took her heart rate to return to something manageable. She called the number she had saved in her phone from the previous week. She told the woman what had happened. The woman's calm voice walked her through the next steps, and Claire wrote them down in the Notes app on her phone, and when the call ended she looked at the notes. She had written, "Document everything. Date, time, location. Do not wait for something to escalate." She started the car. She drove to the police station. She filed the report calmly, in the clinical voice she had used on the phone, and the officer who took the report was professional and thorough, and at the end of their conversation he said that based on what she had described, they would make a note, but that it would need to continue before there were grounds for formal action. She thanked him. She saved his name in her phone. She walked back to her car and she drove home, and she called her sister. "I need you to know what is happening," she said. Lucy listened. When Claire finished, Lucy said, "I want to come to the city." "You don't need to." "I want to. I am okay." "I know you are," Lucy said. "But you shouldn't be doing this by yourself. I have Nina. I have Patrick." "Then let them help you," Lucy said. "Actually let them. Don't just tell them things and then manage it yourself anyway. Let them be part of it." Claire was standing in her kitchen with one hand on the counter. She looked at her apartment, her books, her plants, the gray coat on the hook by the door, the cup she had not washed from this morning. Her ordinary things, her ordinary, careful, constructed life. "Okay," she said. "Good," said Lucy. "I'm coming Saturday." In the days that followed, she began to understand something that she had not been prepared to understand. She had believed, in the part of herself that assessed situations and made plans and was generally right about things, that the ending of what she and Damien had would produce a clean reaction from him. Anger, perhaps, silence, the kind of response that had a discernible shape and a foreseeable end. What she had not accounted for was something Patrick had tried to tell her and she had not fully heard, that the intensity of Damien's pursuit of her was not a product of his care for her specifically. It was a product of his relationship with the concept of losing. He did not experience her as a person who had made a decision she had the right to make. He experienced her as something that had moved away from him without his permission. She understood this now in the way you understand something when it arrives not as an idea but as an experience. It had weight. It had the particular quality of a truth that was unpleasant to hold. She was not being pursued because he loved her. She was being pursued because she had left. The pursuit was not about her. The pursuit was about him. Understanding this did not make the next 3 months easier, but it changed the nature of the difficulty. It removed from her the complicated layer of feeling that had made part of her, the part she was most ashamed of, read his calls and his messages with something that was not quite flattery but was adjacent to it, the old feeling of being chosen. The warmth of that word, dismantled now, and shown for what it actually was, which was something colder and more mechanical than warmth. She stopped checking her phone for his messages the way she had checked it for his messages at the beginning. She stopped interpreting each contact as a signal about his feelings. She started interpreting each contact as data, evidence of a pattern, something to document, something to hand over to the people who were building the case for her. She became, of necessity, a different kind of careful. Not the careful of a woman managing her own heart, the careful of a woman managing her own safety. And there was a particular kind of exhaustion that came with that, a bone-deep, practical, unglamorous exhaustion that had nothing to do with feeling and everything to do with the sustained effort of being alert, of walking to her car with her keys already in her hand, of scanning rooms before she entered them, of going to bed at night and running through the list of things she had done correctly that day to protect herself, the way other people ran through the things they were grateful for. She did not tell Lucy any of this when Lucy came on Saturday. She told her some of it, enough, but the deepest layer she kept, because she had always kept her deepest layers, and because she did not yet know how to talk about this particular kind of fear, without it sounding like more than she wanted anyone to carry for her. Lucy stayed for 3 days. She made dinner and watched television and asked normal questions and was simply, consistently present in the apartment in a way that made the apartment feel less like a place Claire was protecting, and more like a place she lived. On the last evening, sitting on the sofa with their wine, Lucy looked at her and said, "You are going to be okay. I know that sounds like something people say, but I actually know it. You are one of the most clear-eyed people I have ever watched figure something out." Claire looked at her wine. "I should have figured it out sooner." "That is not the lesson," Lucy said firmly. "Do not let the lesson be that you trusted someone and you shouldn't have. The lesson is about what to do next." Claire nodded. She thought about what to do next. That night she lay in bed in the dark, and she was not afraid exactly. She was something harder and quieter than afraid, and she thought about the woman she had been on the rooftop on Ashfield Lane, moving through the room knowing what she liked, spending 8 minutes here and 20 minutes there, entirely in command of her own attention. She thought, "I am going to find my way back to that." She did not know yet how much would be taken from her before she got there. She did not know how long the road was still. She pulled the covers up and closed her eyes and lay in the dark while the city did its usual things outside her window, and she breathed, slowly and deliberately, until she slept. She went to work on a Monday in late July and found that 2 of her regular clients had stopped responding. She had not been expecting this. She had sent follow-up emails the previous week, routine, professional, the kind she sent every few weeks to maintain the working relationships she had spent years carefully building. The first silence she attributed to timing. People were busy. It was summer. Inboxes filled up and responses slowed. The second silence she noticed with slightly more attention. By Tuesday, when neither had responded, she called one of them directly. The woman who picked up was professional and warm, as she always was, and said nothing specific, but there was a quality to the conversation that Claire had not heard before. A slight hesitation, a carefulness that had not been there in their previous calls. At the end, the woman said she would be in touch when her schedule cleared. She did not schedule a specific meeting, which she always had before. Claire hung up and sat at her desk and felt the first cold edge of something she could not name. She told herself she was imagining patterns that were not there. She had been hyper-alert since June. She had been reading everything through the lens of what was happening with Damien, and it was affecting her ability to see ordinary situations as ordinary. This was a known effect of sustained stress. Her therapist had mentioned it. She had started seeing a therapist in July. Her name was Dr. Elaine Marsh, and she was compact and precise and did not speak the way therapists spoke in films, with endless open-ended questions and knowing silences. She spoke plainly and directly and asked Claire to be specific, and Claire found that she could be specific with Elaine, in a way she found difficult with the people she loved, because Elaine had no stake in the answers. At her next session, Claire mentioned the two clients. Elaine asked a few questions. At the end, she said, "Before you decide what this is, gather more information. Talk to someone you trust who knows your professional reputation. Check what you can actually verify." Claire talked to a colleague named Gordon, someone she had known for 8 years, who had connections across the industry and the kind of honest, matter-of-fact relationship with her that made asking uncomfortable questions possible. She asked him, over coffee the following week, if he had heard anything, if there was anything circulating about her professionally. Gordon was quiet for a moment. He turned his cup carefully. Then he said, "There was something. About 2 months ago. I did not think it was real, and I did not think you needed to hear it, because it was coming from an account I could not verify, and I did not want to give it weight by repeating it." "Tell me now," Claire said. He told her. Someone had been sending messages, through several different accounts on 2 different platforms, to contacts within their professional network. The messages contained information about Claire's personal life. They were framed as concern. They used the language of worry rather than accusation, which was what made them effective, because people who received them did not know whether to believe them, and did not know whether to confront her, and so many of them simply pulled back, quietly, without explanation, in the way people pulled back from things they did not want to be adjacent to. "What did the messages say?" she asked. Her voice was very steady. "That you were going through something personal, and that your judgment might be affected." She looked at her coffee. "Were they specific?" "They referenced things," he said carefully. "Things that could only have come from someone who knew you, or thought they knew you." She understood. She called the lawyer she had spoken with months ago when she had first documented the messages and the calls and the appearance outside the gym. The lawyer's name was Fiona Hartwell, and she was efficient and unsentimental, and spoke to Claire in the clear, brisk language of someone who had heard many versions of this story, and understood the particular landscape of it, without requiring explanation. Claire told her about the messages to the professional contacts. Fiona added this to the file. She said it changed the nature of what they were dealing with, that they now had a pattern of coordinated action rather than a cluster of isolated incidents, and that this was significant. "How significant?" Claire asked. "Significant enough to move forward," Fiona said. "The question is whether you want to. What does moving forward mean, practically?" Fiona outlined it. Claire listened with a notepad in front of her, writing down the steps the way she wrote down everything now, with the focused, functional attention of a person who had decided that the only way through something was to understand every part of it. She asked 2 questions. Fiona answered them directly. When the call ended, Claire sat for a moment, and then picked up her pen and added 3 more things to the list. She had not cried about any of this. She noticed that. She had always been a person who cried when things were genuinely hard. She was not someone who prided herself on never crying. She did not think of toughness as a virtue in that particular form. But since June, since the Tuesday call, she had not cried once. She had felt many things: anger, fear, a low, persistent sadness that was less about Damien and more about the version of herself that had gone into this trusting and come out of it with a lawyer and a documented case file, but she had not cried. She thought about this in a session with Elaine in August. She mentioned it. Elaine asked what she thought it meant. "I think I don't have the space for it," Claire said. "There is too much to manage. If I cry about it, I stop being able to manage it." "That might be true," Elaine said. "For now. But at some point you will need to stop managing and start feeling. The managing is useful right now. It will become a problem if you never let yourself stop." "When do I stop?" "When it's safe enough to," Elaine said. "Not before." Claire thought about the word safe. She thought about what safe had meant to her 9 months ago, when she had still been the kind of person for whom safety was a background condition of existence, something so constant and unquestioned that she never thought about it at all, the way you do not think about the air you breathe until the room is wrong. She thought about what safe meant now. keys in her hand before she reached the car, eyes moving through spaces before she entered them. The particular calculation she made before going to new places, about exits and visibility and whether she would be alone. She thought about what it had cost her, not in the dramatic, visible ways, in the quiet, cumulative, invisible ways, in the professional relationships that had pulled back and might never fully return, in the plans she had not made because she could not think far enough ahead, in the sleep that was lighter than it had ever been, interrupted by sounds that resolved into nothing but required a few minutes each time to let her heart slow back down, in the conversation she had not finished having with Patrick at the dinner last spring because she could not locate the version of herself who could have that conversation at full volume anymore. She thought about Nina's brunch table and the word depleted, and how, 10 months ago, she had held that word at arm's length and told herself it would not apply to her. Now she understood what Diane had meant. Not hollowed out, not broken, nothing that dramatic. Something more quiet and more total, like a phone whose battery charged but never quite reached 100% anymore. Like a room that had good light but the window was always slightly dirty. Functional, present, but missing something at the very edge of things that had been so much a part of her she had not known to name it until it was gone. She went home from Elaine's office on a Tuesday evening in August, and she poured a glass of water and she stood at the kitchen sink. The city was doing its evening things. The light was going in the way it went in August, later than it should, as if the summer was reluctant to finish. She stood at the window and watched a woman below on the street walk a dog and speak on the phone at the same time, not hurrying, her face easy. An ordinary person having an ordinary evening. Claire watched her and felt the distance between that and herself, and she felt something land in her chest that was not grief exactly, but was adjacent to it, the feeling of having had something ordinary and losing it, without quite knowing the moment it left. She did not cry. She put her glass down and went to her desk and opened her laptop and composed an email to Fiona Hartwell that said, "I want to move forward. Please advise on next steps." She sent it. She closed the laptop. She made herself dinner. She sat at her kitchen table, the same table she had sat at hundreds of times in this apartment, in this city, in this life she had built with its books and its gray coat and its ordinary things. And she ate. She was very deliberate about eating. She had lost weight she had not meant to lose, and she was trying to reclaim the simple, regular acts of taking care of herself, eating, drinking enough water, going outside in the morning before the day swallowed everything, running when she could manage it. Her phone was on the table, face up, which it had not been before June, which it was now because she needed to see it, because she needed to know. It did not buzz. She finished eating. She washed her dish. She dried it and put it away. She sat on the sofa with her book, but she did not read. She sat with the book open in her lap, and she let her mind rest, which she had not been doing, which Elaine had told her she needed to do. She thought about what Elaine had said, when it's safe enough, not before. She thought, when? She let the words sit there. She did not have an answer yet, but she was asking the question, which was, she supposed, something. Outside, the August evening finally gave up its light. The city went dark. She sat in her apartment with the lamp on and let it. September arrived and brought with it a kind of clarity that Claire had not anticipated. Not a warm clarity, not the kind that came with relief. It was the clarity of a person who has been walking in fog for so long that when the fog begins to thin, even slightly, the sharpness of the world underneath is almost painful. Fiona Hartwell had filed the legal paperwork in the last week of August. The process had begun. There were dates now, and documents, and a sequence of events that moved through the legal system at its own slow, institutional pace. Claire found that having the process underway changed something in her. Not the circumstances, which were the same, but her relationship to them. She had always functioned better when she could see the structure of a thing, when there were steps and she knew what they were. She called Gordon and told him what was happening, in broad terms. He listened without interruption, and at the end he said, "How can I help?" She told him. He said he would do it. He did. He spent 2 weeks quietly making calls to people in the network, the people who had received the anonymous messages about Claire, and saying, simply and plainly, that what they had been told was not accurate, and that Claire was a person of integrity and professional reliability, and that he was willing to stand by that publicly if needed. He did not make a production of it. He did not tell Claire which calls he made or what was said. He simply made them and then told her afterward that he had, and she thanked him and meant it in a way she could not fully articulate, because gratitude had become a very specific and weighted thing for her by then. Not a politeness, but a recognition of what it actually cost people to show up. She understood now how much of what had been taken from her was invisible to people who had not been watching closely. The professional damage could be documented, at least partially. Fiona was gathering evidence of the messages, the accounts, the contacts who had received them. The restraining order application had a formal structure that the legal system understood. What could not be put into a document was the other kind of loss. The kind that lived in her body and her habits. The kind that showed up in the way she moved through rooms, the way she held conversations, the part of herself she had always given freely to people she trusted and now measured out with caution, even with people who had earned it. She mentioned this to Elaine in September. The caution, Elaine said. Tell me more about it. It's like a door, Claire said. Before, the door was open, not carelessly. I wasn't naive, but open. People came in when they had earned the right to. Now I stand behind the door longer before I decide. Is that necessarily bad? I don't know yet. It feels wrong when I do it with people who don't deserve it, when I catch myself calculating trust with someone like Nina or Patrick. That feels like something being taken from them as well as from me. Do you tell them that? No. Why not? She thought about it. Because I don't want them to feel like they are being managed. And you are managing them. Yes. What would happen if you stopped? She looked at the window. I'm afraid the feelings would be too big to handle, while I'm still in the middle of the legal process. I'm afraid I would fall apart at a time when I cannot afford to. What would falling apart look like? I'm not sure. I have not let it happen. You are very skilled at not letting things happen, Elaine said. This was not entirely a compliment, and they both knew it. The restraining order was granted in October. The hearing was straightforward, in the clinical way that legal proceedings are straightforward. A room, a table, a process that moved through specific criteria without sentimentality. Fiona was beside her. The judge asked questions. Claire answered them. The documentation they had gathered, the messages, the calls, the dates and times of appearances at her workplace and her gym, the evidence of coordinated contact with her professional network, was presented clearly and without emotion, because that was the best way to present it. She sat in the courtroom and she listened to her own story being organized into the language of evidence, and she felt, for the first time in months, that the ground was slightly solid under her feet. The order was granted the same afternoon. Fiona shook her hand outside the courtroom. She was professional and warm and brief. This is a significant step, she said. It doesn't end here, but it changes the terrain. How long does the process take? The rest of it? It depends on how he responds, Fiona said. Compliance or pushback. We will not know for a few weeks. Claire nodded. She thanked Fiona. She walked to the car. She sat in the driver's seat and she looked at the steering wheel, and she breathed. She called Nina. Nina answered on the first ring. It was granted, Claire said. Nina made a sound that was not quite a word. Then she said, Come over. Come right now. I'm okay. I know you're okay. Come over anyway. She drove to Nina's apartment. Nina made tea and they sat at the kitchen table and did not talk about it much, actually. They talked about other things. The ordinary things that had not stopped being ordinary just because the last several months had been what they were. And somewhere in the middle of talking about something Nina's neighbor had done that was mildly absurd, Claire laughed. A real laugh. It surprised her. Nina looked at her with such open warmth when it happened that Claire had to look away for a moment. There she is, Nina said quietly. Not triumphantly, just recognizing. Claire shook her head. Don't make me cry. Why not? Because I have not yet, and I don't know what happens if I start. Probably nothing terrible, Nina said. Probably just crying. They sat with that. Claire looked at her tea. She thought about what Elaine had said. When it's safe enough. Not before. She thought. Maybe now is close enough. But she did not cry that evening. She drove home at 10. She brushed her teeth. She got into bed and she lay in the dark and she thought about all of it. October, the courtroom, the word granted, the feel of solid ground. And she thought about the Claire who had stood on the rooftop of the building on Ashfield Lane almost exactly a year ago, who had looked at a man across the room and felt the particular quality of his attention, and filed it away as interesting. She thought about everything that had followed from that evening. She thought about what she knew now that she had not known then. She thought about how none of the things she had not known had been things she should have known before she could have seen them. That was the thing she was still working on accepting, that intelligence and experience and caution were not protection against someone who had practiced being what you needed long enough to make the practice invisible. She thought about the 41 messages in the dark of her bedroom in June. She thought about the Saturday morning outside the gym, and the calls to her work line, and the professional contacts who had received messages framed as concern. She thought about the word depleted, and how Diane had used it, and how it had taken her so long to arrive at it herself, and how when she did, it was not a defeat, exactly, but the beginning of something she could not name yet. She closed her eyes. She slept. Not well, but she slept. November brought his solicitor's response to the restraining order. It was compliant, technically, but challenged 3 of the documented incidents on the grounds of interpretation. Fiona read it and said, "Expected. This is standard. We have the documentation. We will respond directly." Claire read it once and gave it back to Fiona. She was discovering something about the process of legal protection, that it required a kind of emotional detachment she had not known she was capable of, that every document, every response, every formal exchange had to be read and addressed from a place that was several degrees removed from the feelings she was actually having about it. She became good at the detachment, terrifyingly good at it. She would sit in Fiona's office and discuss the specifics of things that had happened to her, and she would feel, during the discussion, almost nothing at all. Then she would drive home, and feel everything simultaneously in the 40 minutes of traffic. She mentioned this to Elaine. "You are learning to compartmentalize," Elaine said. "Is that good?" "It is useful," Elaine said. "As a short-term strategy. It is not something you want to carry indefinitely, but for now, it's what you need to move through this." "How do I know when to stop?" "You will know," Elaine said. "When the emergency is over and the compartment is still closed, you will feel it. You will start to feel the lid." Claire thought about this for many weeks afterward. She thought about the lid. She thought about the things she was keeping on the other side of it and whether they would still be manageable when she finally had to open it. December arrived. A year had almost passed since the rooftop gathering. She did not think about this deliberately, but she noticed the calendar, and she noticed October, and she noticed that a year was a large unit of time to hold everything that had happened in it. She went home to her parents for Christmas. Her parents' house was the same as it had always been. Her father's books in the hallway, her mother's habit of having the radio on at low volume even in rooms where no one was listening, the particular smell of the kitchen that she associated, without being able to explain why, with the feeling of being young and small and entirely safe. Lucy came with her husband and the children. They were loud and warm and thoroughly demanding in the way that small children are, and Claire found, to her surprise, that the demand was a relief. The children needed things and she provided them. She read to the younger one before bed, and he fell asleep in the middle of the second story, his breath going slow and even, his small hand still loosely curled around her finger. She sat in the dim of the room for a while after, not moving, not wanting to disturb him, and felt something settle in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, something older and quieter than happiness. The feeling of being in a room where nothing was required of her except to be present, where there was nothing to manage and nothing to document, and nothing to be careful about. Just the small breathing weight of a child's trust, and the old lamp in the corner, and the sounds of the house. She thought, I had forgotten this was possible. She thought about what had been taken. She thought about it without the clinical detachment of the legal process, without the management. She let herself feel the shape of the loss, the year of her life, the professional cost, the friendships that had frayed, the sleep, the caution, the permanent slight change in how she moved through the world. She let herself feel it in the dark of the children's room, while her nephew slept. She did not cry, but she came very close. She stayed until her nephew's breathing was deeply and unmistakably the breathing of sleep, and then she carefully freed her finger and went downstairs, where Lucy was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and Claire sat down across from her, and Lucy looked at her with the face she made when she was looking directly at something, and she said, "How are you?" "Actually, getting there," Claire said. "Where is there?" "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know what the direction feels like." Lucy nodded. She reached across and covered Claire's hand with hers, not gripping, just covering. And Claire, to her own surprise, let her. January was the month she found the thing on her car. She had come downstairs at 6:50 in the morning for her Monday run. The building was quiet. The lobby was empty. The air outside was that hard, thin cold of January that carried with it the particular sense that winter had stopped pretending to be manageable and had decided to commit. She came through the front door and turned toward the street where her car was parked, and she saw it from 10 feet away. She stopped moving. It was small, a photograph, fixed to the windshield under the wiper blade. She walked toward the car with her heartbeat very loud in her own ears, and she looked at the photograph, and she understood in a single moment that it had been taken from a distance, through a lens, from somewhere she had not noticed, on an evening she could identify precisely from the coat she was wearing, a Thursday 3 weeks prior, when she had been standing in the car park of the supermarket 2 streets from her flat, loading groceries into the boot. In the photograph, she was alone. She was not doing anything. She was just standing at her car in the evening light with a paper bag of groceries. But the photograph existed. Someone had been close enough to take it, close enough to develop it and print it and come to this building, in the night or the early morning, and fix it to her windshield. She stood on the pavement and she did not touch the photograph. She had been told, months ago, in one of her first conversations with Fiona Hartwell, that if anything arrived, if anything physical appeared, she was not to touch it. She was to photograph it in situ and call Fiona before she touched anything. She got out her phone. Her hands were steady. She photographed the windshield, the wiper blade, the photograph itself. She photographed the car from multiple angles. She photographed the pavement around the car. She did all of this with the focused, mechanical precision of someone who had been told what to do and was doing it. Then she went and sat on the front step of her building. She sat on the cold stone step in her running clothes in the January morning, and she looked at the street, which was beginning to move with its early commuter activity, and she counted to 10, slowly, and then she called Fiona Hartwell. Fiona answered on the 3rd ring. "I'm sorry to call this early," Claire said. "Don't apologize. Tell me," Claire told her. She described the photograph. She told her where her car was parked, what the image showed, what the approximate timing must have been. Her voice was very level. Fiona asked several questions. Claire answered them. At the end, Fiona said, "Do not move the car. I am sending someone. Can you go back inside the building?" "Yes." "Do that. I will call you back in 15 minutes. Claire went back inside. She went up to her apartment. She sat at her kitchen table in her running clothes and she called Nina. "Nina," she said when Nina answered. Something in the single syllable must have communicated itself, because Nina said immediately, "What happened? Are you inside?" "I'm inside. I'm fine. Tell me." She told her. Nina said, "I'm coming." "You don't have—" "I am coming. Make yourself a cup of tea. I will be there in 20 minutes. She made the tea. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the street where her car was parked and thought about the Thursday 3 weeks ago at the supermarket. She ran through the evening in her mind. She had not noticed anything. She had been entirely ordinary, shopping, loading bags, thinking about what she needed to do before the week started. She had parked under the light, as she always did now, because she had learned to park under the light. She had checked around the car before she got in, as she always did now. She had not seen anything, which meant she had been watched by someone who knew how not to be seen. She thought, this is what the photograph was designed to make me feel, the knowing, the understanding that the distance I thought I had created was not as large as I believed. She understood that. She held the understanding at arm's length and did not let it collapse into her. Fiona called back at 7:20. She told Claire what was happening on the legal side, what this photograph meant in the context of the existing restraining order, what the next steps were. Claire wrote them down. She asked 2 questions. Fiona answered both. At the end, Fiona said, "This is a serious escalation, but it also gives us significant additional grounds. I want you to understand that." "I understand. How are you?" It was not a question Fiona usually asked. She was professional in the particular way of people who have learned that keeping emotion out of their work makes them more effective. The fact that she asked now registered. "I'm managing," Claire said. "That's enough for right now," Fiona said. Nina arrived at 7:40 with food she had bought from the bakery on the corner near her flat, the kind of food you buy when you want to feed someone without making a production of feeding them. She put it on the table. She sat down. She looked at Claire with the look that had 15 years behind it. "Tell me the whole thing," she said. Claire told her, not in the detached legal voice she used with Fiona. All of it, the running clothes, the cold step, the steadiness of her own hands while she was photographing the car, and the particular thing she had felt standing there on the pavement in the January morning that she had not been able to feel while she was being practical about it, which was, afraid. She said the word out loud. Afraid. She had not said it out loud before. Not in the specific way she meant it now. Not the management afraid. The precaution afraid. The documented risk afraid. The real one. The one that lived in the body. "Okay," Nina said quietly. "I have been doing all the right things," Claire said. "I have documentation. I have Fiona. I have the order. I have done everything correctly. I know. And it was still there on my car this morning." "I know." Claire put her hands flat on the table. She looked at them. She had good hands. She had always thought so. They were capable and practical, and she associated them with getting things done. They were still steady. She was still steady. But underneath the steadiness was something that was tired, deeply and genuinely tired, in a way she had not admitted even to herself before this morning. "I am exhausted," she said. "Yes, I didn't know how exhausted until right now." "That's what this kind of thing does," Nina said. "It uses the energy you didn't know you were spending." They sat with that for a while. Nina poured more tea. Outside, the January morning moved forward, ordinary and indifferent. Patrick came by at noon. She had not called him, Nina had, and he arrived with the particular quietness he carried, when he knew words were not the most useful thing. He sat in the chair across from her, and he did not ask her to explain anything. He just sat there, present in the way that some people are able to be present, not fixing, not advising, just occupying the same room and making the room feel less like a place you were alone in. She was grateful for him in a way she could not fully voice. The legal process moved quickly after the photograph. Fiona had been methodical and thorough, and the evidence now was not just a pattern of messages and appearances but something physical, something that demonstrated a sustained and deliberate effort to make Claire aware that she was being watched, even under the terms of a court order that expressly prohibited contact. The photograph was dated by the metadata on the device it had been taken with, which the forensic evidence later confirmed. The timing matched the restraining order period. It went to court in February. She sat in the building that processed these things, formal and institutional, and lit by overhead lights that had no interest in anyone's feelings about what was happening beneath them, and she watched the process move. Fiona was beside her, crisp and prepared. A barrister she had been introduced to 3 weeks prior argued their case with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times and found the evidence here to be unusually solid. Damien Carver sat on the other side of the room. She had known he would be there. She had prepared for it in the way she had prepared for everything in the last 8 months, with information, with structure, with the deliberate decision to approach it as a thing to be gotten through, rather than a thing to be felt. She had told Elaine about the anticipated presence at the previous session. Elaine had said, "You do not have to look at him. You are allowed to look only at what is directly relevant." She did not look at him. She looked at Fiona, and at the barrister, and at the judge when the judge spoke, and at the window on the far side of the room when none of those were required. She heard his voice once, briefly, when he was asked to confirm his name. It was the same voice, level, controlled, the same quality of composure that had been, at the beginning, one of the things she had found striking about him. She heard it, and she felt, with some surprise, almost nothing at all. Not the complicated feeling she had expected, not the old pull of the early months, not the sharper anger of the later ones, something cleaner than either, a kind of neutrality that she recognized after a moment, as the neutrality of someone who has finished grieving something and has come out the other side into the specific quiet of being done. The hearing took most of the morning. The finding came in the early afternoon. The barrister said something to her and Fiona outside the courtroom, quietly, with professional restraint, because that was the appropriate register. Fiona shook her hand. Claire thanked both of them. She walked down the corridor of the building and out through the front door and into the February afternoon, which was cold and bright, the sky that particular pale blue that sometimes appears in winter when the cloud has finally cleared. She stood on the pavement. She thought about nothing specific. She called Lucy from the pavement. When Lucy answered, Claire said, "It's done." Lucy made a sound. Then she said, "How are you?" "I'm standing outside," Claire said. "It's cold. I can't feel my hands. But you're okay." "Yes." "Go get warm," Lucy said. "Then call me back and tell me everything." She found a cafe 2 streets away and ordered coffee she did not drink and sat at the window and looked at the street outside. People moved past. A man walked a dog. 2 women stopped to look at something in a shop window and then walked on. The city was doing what it always did, which was proceed without consulting anyone about whether they were ready. She thought about what she had lost over the past year. She tried to be honest about it, not dramatic, not minimizing, just accurate. The professional relationships that had needed rebuilding, the friendship that had frayed and had not come back, the sleep she had permanently upgraded her caution to earn, the ease. That was perhaps the most honest word for the thing that was hardest to quantify. The ease with which she had once moved through the world, toward people, toward new things, toward the particular adventure of not knowing exactly how something would go. She thought about what remained. Nina, Patrick, Lucy, Gordon, who had made calls without being asked to justify them, Elaine, who was specific and direct and never asked her to feel something before she was ready, her work, which had survived and was slowly recovering, the apartment with the books and the gray coat, the ordinary, stubborn machinery of her own life. She thought about what she was building back. It was different from what had been there before, not worse. She did not believe it was worse, but different. The ease was not yet back. She was not sure it would come back in exactly its original form, and she was learning to make peace with that. There was a version of ease that was naive, and perhaps what would return was a version that had survived something, and perhaps that was, in the long run, more useful. She was not sure yet. She picked up her coffee and drank it even though it had gone cold, because she needed to do something with her hands. She thought, I am going to be okay. Not as a comfort, as a fact. A sober, straightforward assessment of the available evidence. She sat in the cold cafe in the February afternoon and let it be a fact. Then she called Lucy back, and she told her everything. March was when she started sleeping without the light on. She did not plan it. She had been sleeping with the small lamp on the nightstand switched on for 8 months, ever since June, ever since the 41 messages in the dark of her bedroom, ever since her sleep had become the kind of sleep that was always slightly ready to surface. She had stopped noticing the lamp. It had become part of the room, like the glass of water on the nightstand and the book she read for 30 minutes before she tried to sleep, and she had stopped associating it with the reason she had started using it. On a Thursday in mid-March, she fell asleep before she turned it off. She woke at 6 in the morning, the room bright from the lamp and from the early spring light already finding its way through the curtains. She lay there for a moment before she realized what was different. She had slept all the way through. Not the managed, careful sleep of the previous 8 months, where she surfaced at sounds and waited and assessed and then allowed herself to go back down. She had simply slept. She turned off the lamp. She lay in the morning light for a while. She thought, something is changing. She mentioned it to Elaine at their next session. Elaine said, what do you think it means? I think my nervous system is starting to believe that the threat level has changed, Claire said. I think my body is adjusting to the reality that the legal process worked, and that I have not had any contact in 6 weeks. How does that feel? Strange, she said honestly. It feels like putting down something heavy that you've been carrying so long you stopped feeling the weight. What will you do with your hands? Elaine said. It was the first time in all their sessions together that Claire had heard her say something that was both specific and gently funny, and she looked at Elaine with some surprise. Elaine looked back with the controlled expression that was the closest she usually came to warmth. I don't know yet, Claire said. I haven't gotten there. You will. The spring arrived the way spring always arrived in this city. Not all at once, but in pieces. A mild day followed by cold, followed by 3 good days in a row, that made you believe it had committed. And then the light in the evening starting to linger in the particular way that was different from winter light. Not just longer but softer somehow, as if the air itself was more willing. She began running again in April. She had run before June. It had been part of her routine for years, one of those physical habits that kept the balance of herself functional. And then after June she had done it inconsistently, in the guarded way she now did most things, and then less and less as the autumn had arrived and the effort of the legal process had consumed the energy she might have directed at it. She ran in the mornings now, before work. The route she took went along the river path and through the small park at the bend and back up through the streets of the residential quarter near her building. She ran with her headphones on. Music only, not podcasts. She was done, for a while, with absorbing information about difficult things and needed the music to simply be noise that her body could move inside. She noticed, in the second week of running again, that she was not scanning. She was not checking corners or running calculations about the people she passed. She was just running, just moving, just the city, and the spring morning air, and the particular pleasure of a body that was being used at full capacity. She noticed it, and she thought, here it is, the ease, coming back. Not the old ease, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become it. She told Patrick about the running when they had coffee one Saturday. He looked at her with the thoughtful expression he wore when he was registering something he did not want to make too much of. Good, he said simply. I know, she said. It's a small thing. Small things are where it starts, he said. You know that. She did know it. She had always known it about other people. She was the kind of friend who noticed the small things and understood their significance. She was only now learning to apply that understanding to herself. She had a conversation in April with Ruth, the woman from the art gallery the previous autumn, the woman she had been with when she had checked her phone 4 times during the first hour of the exhibition. She had not spoken to Ruth much since then. The gap had not been unfriendly, just an effect of everything contracting around her, the way her world had narrowed over the course of the last year, not so much consciously as by necessity, the way you might close windows in bad weather. She called Ruth on a Tuesday. Ruth answered warmly, with no trace of the gap. They made a plan for the following week. Another exhibition as it happened, different gallery, They went. Claire did not check her phone once during the first hour. She walked through the gallery with Ruth and looked at the paintings and said what she actually thought about them, which was not always positive, and Ruth said what she thought, which was not always positive either. And they argued pleasantly about one piece for 10 minutes in the way that people argue about art when they are actually engaging with it, rather than performing engagement. On the way out, Ruth said, "This was good. We should do this more." "We should," Claire said. She meant it. She felt herself mean it without having to check whether it was safe to mean it. She caught the feeling and noted it. She did not say anything out loud about it, because it was not a shareable observation in the middle of a Tuesday evening after an art gallery, but she held it and carried it home with her and put it down carefully, like something that could break if handled wrong. Elaine had told her, in one of their sessions in the autumn, when the legal process was ongoing and the weight of it was heaviest, that what she was experiencing was not just the aftermath of one specific relationship, that it was, more accurately, the aftermath of a sustained period during which her fundamental sense of safety had been challenged, and that the work of recovery was not, as people sometimes expected, the work of forgetting, or moving on, or returning to exactly who she had been before. The work was subtler and stranger than that. The work was the gradual, uneven reconstruction of trust, not trust in any specific person, but trust in the general reliability of the world. The belief that the room she walked into was unlikely to contain something designed to harm her. The belief that the person sitting across from her at dinner probably meant what they said. The belief that she did not have to stand behind the door for too long before she opened it. She thought about this often in the spring. She was not there yet. She knew she was not there yet. But she was somewhere between where she had been in August and where she wanted to eventually be, and the distance between August and April was already significant, and she could see, if she stood at the April point and looked forward, something on the horizon that was not yet a place but was the suggestion of one. She had lunch with Diane in May. This had not been planned. They had run into each other at a gathering, a quieter one than the rooftop on Ashfield Lane, a small group at a mutual friend's flat, and Diane had asked how she was, and Claire had said, honestly, getting better, and Diane had looked at her with something that was not quite recognition but was close to it. They had made a plan for the following week. Over lunch, after they had moved through the ordinary layer of things, Diane said, "I want to say something, and you can tell me if it's out of place." "Go ahead," Claire said. "I should have said more clearly at the beginning," Diane said. "I said he was charming in a way that made you want to be careful, but I should have been more specific. I knew enough about him to be more specific. And I wasn't. And I think about that." Claire looked at her. "You couldn't have known what would happen." "No, but I knew enough about who he was to have been clearer." Claire thought about this. She thought about the ways in which the story she was living inside had been visible in fragments to people around her at the beginning. Diane's unfinished sentence, Nina's measured warnings, Gordon's note about the messages he had not passed on because he had not wanted to give them weight. She thought about how each of these people had held a partial truth that, assembled, might have produced a fuller picture. She did not say, "You should have told me." She did not believe that was the useful thing to say, and she also did not fully believe it was true. She was not certain she would have heard a fuller picture even if one had been offered. She had been in the early, warm stage of something that she had wanted, and wanting is a powerful filter. "You said what you said," Claire told Diane. "I heard it. I did not listen to it all the way, but I heard it. That's on me as much as it's on anyone." "You're generous," Diane said. "I'm accurate," Claire said. "I've had a lot of time to be accurate about this." They had dessert. They talked about Diane's work. They made a vague plan to do this again. When they parted on the pavement outside, Claire walked to her car with her bag over one shoulder, and the May air easy around her, and thought, that was not hard. Going back to that was not hard. She filed this away. Another piece of evidence for the forward horizon. At her May session with Elaine, Claire said, "I want to talk about what I want next." Elaine looked at her. "All right. I don't mean in relationships, I mean generally. I feel like I have spent a year reacting to what was happening to me and doing what I needed to do in order to survive it. And now the active part is over, and I keep waiting to feel sure about what comes next, but I'm not sure yet. What would sure feel like?" She thought about it, like knowing what I am moving toward, she said, rather than what I am moving away from. "That's a significant distinction," Elaine said, "and you're right that it's different. Moving away from something gives you a direction but no destination. Moving towards something requires knowing what you want. I used to know what I wanted. Tell me what you wanted." Before, she thought back. She thought about the Claire of 2 years ago, before the rooftop, before Damien, before any of this. She had been a woman with plans, with specific, articulated plans. She had wanted to grow her work in a particular direction. She had wanted to travel. She had a list of places, an actual written list, in a notebook she had not opened in over a year. She had wanted more evenings like the one with Diane at the gallery, where someone pushed back on what she said, and she pushed back on what they said, and both of them left having genuinely thought. She had wanted, eventually, something real with someone. Not necessarily dramatic, not necessarily permanent in the very specific sense, but real, genuine. The kind of thing that added to who she was rather than taking from it. I can say some of them, she told Elaine. The wanting is coming back. It's not where it was, but I can feel it. Good, Elaine said. That's the direction. She walked home from Elaine's office that evening. It was a 30-minute walk she usually did not take, preferring the bus. But the May evening was good enough, and she wanted to be outside in it. Wanted the particular sensation of moving through the city under her own power, with no particular urgency. She walked through the streets she knew well and some she did not know as well, and at one point she turned a corner and found herself at the edge of the residential quarter she had grown up in, which was not on any direct route between Elaine's office and her apartment, which meant she had navigated here without deciding to. She stood for a moment on the corner. She could see, from here, the end of the street where her parents had lived when she was small, before they had moved to the house outside the city. She could see the park at the end of it where she had spent a large portion of her childhood. She could see the library building on the corner, which was still a library, which not many things still were. She stood on the corner and looked at the street, and thought about the child she had been there, small and quick, and absolutely certain of herself in the way that children are certain of themselves before the world begins to offer it specific challenges. She thought about the specific quality of that certainty, the unquestioned expectation that she was allowed to take up space, to want things, to move toward what she found interesting and away from what she didn't. She thought, I want that back. Not the child, not the specific circumstances, but that feeling, that foundational, ordinary expectation. She thought, I am going to get it back. She turned and walked home through the May evening. The light was going slowly, in the way it went in late spring, reluctantly, as if the day was not quite finished with itself. She walked without checking her phone. She walked without scanning. She walked with her hands in her pockets and her face turned slightly toward the last of the light. She thought about the running. She thought about the art gallery and not checking her phone. She thought about the lunch with Diane and the coffee with Patrick and the evening at Nina's table where she had laughed at something genuinely funny. She thought about Elaine asking what would sure feel like, and she thought that she did not need to know the destination in order to feel the direction. She knew the direction. She walked home. The sentencing hearing was set for a Thursday in June, almost exactly a year after the Tuesday call, the Tuesday she had sat on her sofa and said what she needed to say, and heard one word in return, and believed it was an ending. She had known the hearing was coming for 2 months. Fiona had kept her informed at every stage, with the calm efficiency that Claire had come to rely on, and at their final preparatory meeting 2 weeks before the date, Fiona had outlined what to expect, the charges and the evidence, the likely range of outcomes, what Claire's role would be, which was to be present, which was to answer questions if called upon, which was to say, in writing and through her barrister, what the year had cost her. She had written the impact statement in April. She had sat at her desk on a Saturday afternoon, and she had written it in the careful, specific, factual language that was required of such documents, and she had gone through it 3 times after she finished to make sure she had not inflated or minimized, that every word was accurate and earned. It was not the easiest thing she had ever written. It was not the hardest either. The hardest part had been the section about the professional impact, not because it was the deepest loss, but because quantifying it made it real in a different way from the rest. There were numbers involved, there were specific relationships named, there was a before and an after that could be placed side by side. She had read it to Elaine at a session before she submitted it. Elaine had listened without interrupting. When Claire finished reading, there was a quiet in the room. How do you feel about it? Elaine asked. Accurate, Claire said. It is exactly what happened. Is there anything missing? She thought about it. She thought about the lamp she had slept with on for 8 months. She thought about the phone she had checked 4 times in an art gallery. She thought about the lid Elaine had described, the compartment she had kept tightly closed in order to function through the legal process. She thought about all the things that did not have a number attached to them, that could not be placed in a document or handed to a barrister to be argued before a judge. There are things I couldn't put in, she said, things that don't fit the format. Are you okay with that? I'm learning to be, she said. I don't think those things are any less real because they couldn't be documented. I just know they couldn't be. She submitted the statement the following week. On the Thursday, she woke at 6. She lay in bed for a few minutes in the ordinary morning dark. No lamp, just the beginning of summer light pressing at the edges of the curtains, and she took stock of herself. She was not agitated. She was alert, which was different. She ate breakfast with attention, dressed with care, and drove herself to the building where the hearing was held, which was the same building as February, the same overhead lights that had no interest in anyone's feelings. Fiona met her in the hall outside. They went over the sequence of the morning one more time. Claire listened and nodded and asked one question, which Fiona answered. She found herself, in the final minutes before they went in, thinking about a thing Patrick had said to her months ago, when she had called him from the office after Gordon had told her about the anonymous messages to her professional network. Patrick had asked, "How can I help?" And she had told him something specific, and he had done that specific thing, and that had been the pattern of Patrick throughout all of this. Present, practical, asking only the question that was most useful. She thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who, when someone needed something, asked how they could help and then actually did it. She thought about how much of her energy, in the previous year, had been directed at preventing herself from needing things, at managing her needs down to a size that would not burden anyone, that would not ask too much of anyone, that would leave her as self-sufficient as possible even while she was being systematically undermined. She thought about what it had taken to let Lucy cover her hand at the kitchen table at Christmas. Such a small thing, such a proportionate, normal expression of care from a sister who loved her, and it had required from her a kind of deliberate permission that she had not needed before. She was working on that, on letting proportionate things land without first measuring whether she deserved them. They went into the hearing. She sat in the same room as February, with the same overhead lights and the same institutional furniture, and the same formal atmosphere that was, she had learned, both the difficulty and the point of such places. The formality was what gave the process its weight. The formality was what made it mean something. She did not look at him. She looked at Fiona, and at the barrister, and at the documents in front of her, and at the window on the far side of the room. She listened carefully to the proceedings and noted what she heard with the clarity she had developed over the course of this year. The ability to register something precisely and hold it without immediately converting it into feeling. The statement she had written was read into the record. She sat still while it was read. She had heard it in her own voice in Elaine's office, and she had heard it in her own head across the months of revision, and hearing it now in the formal, neutral voice of the barrister, in this room, in front of these people, it sounded like someone else's story. It sounded like an account of something that had happened to a woman she knew and cared about and was deeply sorry for. It was both of those things simultaneously. The finding came in the early afternoon. It was the same as February, in that it concluded the way she had needed it to conclude. It was different from February in that the outcome now had weight attached to it, not just the formal acknowledgement that the order had been violated, but the formal assignment of consequence. The consequence was not large. She had expected this. Fiona had prepared her for this. The number was small against the year it represented, small against the cost that was in the statement, and the cost that was not in the statement. She heard the number and she noted it, and she let it sit without deciding, in that moment, how to feel about it. Outside the building afterward, in the same June afternoon light as her drive to work that Tuesday a year ago, Fiona shook her hand with the same professional warmth as February. "It is done," Fiona said, "not finished. It will take time to feel finished, but done." "I know," Claire said. "Thank you, for all of it." Fiona nodded. She gathered her things with the efficiency she always had. She said she would be in touch with the final paperwork in the next few weeks. She left. Claire stood on the pavement. She thought about the word done. She thought, "I need to call Lucy." She walked away from the building, down the pavement, and at the corner she stopped. The city moved past her. A bus, a woman with a pram, two men in conversation who were walking too slowly, and then parted around her like water around something fixed. She thought about the day of the rooftop on Ashfield Lane, the October night, the string lights, the city spread out in every direction, the man on the other side of the terrace who had not looked away when she caught him watching. She thought about how small that moment had been, how unannounced, how without any of the markings that the significant moments of your life are supposed to carry, so you know to pay attention. She thought about Nina saying, "You look like you're listening for a sound." She thought about Diane saying, "He is very charming," in the way that makes you want to be careful. She thought about Lucy's question, months ago, before any of this. "How do you feel about yourself when you are with him?" She had answered, "Sharper, more visible, better." She thought about the true answer now, not the answer she had given because she had wanted it to be the answer, the actual one, available only in retrospect with everything she now knew. The true answer was, "I felt chosen, and I had not realized, until then, how hungry I was to feel chosen. And I did not stop to ask who was doing the choosing or what they were choosing me for. This was not a comfortable thing to know about yourself. It was, however, a useful one. She had spent a long time, in the course of this year, trying to understand how it had happened, how someone careful and experienced and self-aware had moved through the stages of it without seeing what she was moving toward. She had arrived, through this sustained and sometimes painful inquiry, at a few things she believed to be true. That no amount of intelligence fully protects against someone who is practiced at identifying and targeting what you want to feel. That the desire to be deeply known and genuinely valued is so fundamental that it can, under the right conditions, override the more cautious parts of a person. That knowing these things is important precisely because it distributes the understanding correctly, between the person who did something to someone, and the person it was done to. She had done nothing wrong. She had wanted something real, and she had believed, for a while, that she had found it. What she had found was a very good performance of something real. The difference was not visible from the inside of it. She was done apologizing to herself for not seeing it sooner. She was done. She called Lucy. Lucy answered on the first ring, because Lucy had known this call was coming today, had known the time of the hearing, had texted twice in the morning to say she was thinking of her. "It's done," Claire said. A pause. "How do you feel?" She thought about it. She stood on the corner with the city moving around her, and she let the question land, and she tried, honestly, to answer it. "Like something I have been carrying for a very long time has been set down," she said. "Not gone. Just set down. And I can see the shape of my own hands now." Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come and see us this weekend." "I'll come Saturday." "Good. The children will be delighted. They keep asking about you." "Tell them I am asking about them." She hung up and put her phone in her pocket, and stood on the corner for another moment. The June afternoon was warm. The light was full and even and honest, the kind of light that did not flatter but did not harsh, just showed things as they were. She stood in it. She thought, "I am going to be fine." She walked to her car. She drove home. She was not fine yet, exactly, but she was in the neighborhood of it, and she knew what it looked like, and she was moving toward it on her own terms, at her own pace, with her hands free. That was enough. That was, she had come to understand, more than enough. 2 years after the rooftop, Claire stood at a window in a building she had never been in before, and looked out at a city she had known all her life, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was entirely herself. The building was on the east side of the city. The window looked toward the old quarter, which she could see from this angle lit by the morning light, the narrow streets, the old stonework, the particular quality of the architecture that had always seemed to her both permanent and precarious, built to last but built with full knowledge that nothing built by people lasted without maintenance. She had not been to the east side much in the last 2 years. The memory of the terrace that Damien had taken her to on their first real evening together had made this part of the city feel complicated for a while. Not dangerous, just weighted with the kind of association that makes places temporarily inaccessible. She was here now because she was considering office space on this floor. Her work had grown in the previous year. It had recovered and then, in the second half of the year, done something she had not planned for, which was that it had expanded in a direction she had not originally intended. Part of this was Gordon's doing. The calls he had made, the reputation he had reinforced, had not just held the professional ground, but had generated some new ground in the form of introductions she might not have received otherwise. She thought about this sometimes without entirely knowing how to feel about it, that one of the effects of everything that had happened to her had been, indirectly, a professional expansion she might not have arrived at through any planned route. She did not celebrate this. It did not make any of what she had lost worthwhile. But she held it as a fact, because she had learned, in the last 2 years, to hold facts as facts, without immediately converting them into meaning. The office was good. It was large enough, and had the right light, and was in a building with other people doing interesting work, and a shared space on the lower floor, where you could eat lunch with someone if you wanted to or sit alone if you needed to, both of which she did, depending on the day. She put a deposit down before she left. In the elevator going down, she looked at her own reflection in the steel of the door. She was 30 years old. She had the haircut she had cut last spring, shorter than she had worn it before, which she had done partly on impulse and partly because she had needed, at that point in her recovery, the small declaration of doing something deliberate with her own appearance, claiming something. She looked like herself. She looked, she thought with some surprise, well. She had a session with Elaine that afternoon. They were meeting now once a month rather than weekly, which was a change they had made in January and which had felt at the time like a significant marker. She told Elaine about the office space. Elaine asked a few questions that were specifically about the work. Then she asked, "How do you feel about being in that part of the city?" "I thought it would be harder than it was," Claire said. "When I got there and looked out the window, the first thing I thought about was the terrace. And then that thought passed and I was just looking at the city. That sounds like progress." It felt like it. Elaine looked at her with the particular expression she had, the one that was not quite warmth but was its functional equivalent. "I want to say something that I have been considering saying for a few months." "Go ahead," Claire said. "I think you are ready to start thinking about what you want the next chapter to look like, not just professionally, the whole of it." Claire said nothing for a moment. She looked at the window in Elaine's office, including the relationship part. That is the part most people need the most time to consider. "I've considered it," Claire said. "I've been considering it since somewhere around last October, honestly. I just haven't said it out loud." "Say it out loud now." She took a breath. "I want it," she said. "I want something real with someone. I am not there yet, in terms of feeling ready, but I can feel the wanting again. And the wanting does not feel like the wanting from before. It doesn't feel like hunger. It feels like direction. Like something I am moving toward on my own terms. Not because of what it would do to the feeling of being alone, but because I genuinely want the particular thing of knowing someone and being known." She paused. "That feels different from what it was." "It is different," Elaine said, "and the difference matters." They talked about it for the remainder of the session. At the end, Elaine said they would meet again in a month. Claire thanked her and put her coat on and went out into the afternoon, which was a September afternoon, the same month, nearly 2 years on, that they had had their first session. The city was doing its September things, the summer giving way in the particular way it gave way here, suddenly and fully, the light-changing key in a single week. She walked to her car and drove across the city to Lucy's house because she was going there for dinner, had been going for dinner there approximately once a month since the January when she had finally allowed herself to be part of it rather than managing it. Lucy's children were 2 years older and correspondingly more demanding and more interesting. The younger one had developed an opinion about everything, which Claire found delightful in a way that was perhaps disproportionate, but that she did not apologize for. At dinner, Lucy's husband Henry asked her about the new office, because Lucy had told him, and Henry was one of those people who asked about things in a way that demonstrated he was actually interested rather than making conversation. She told him about it. He asked a good question. They talked about it while Lucy moved between the table and the kitchen, and the children ate with the selective and irrational focus of people who have very strong feelings about which foods should and should not touch on a plate. After the children were in bed, the three of them sat at the kitchen table with wine and talked in the easy, open way that she had slowly grown back into. She had not rushed this, she had let it find its own pace, the way you have to let some things find their own pace. And it had, and here they were. A table, wine, the ordinary intimacy of people who knew each other well and were not performing anything. Henry asked, at some point in the evening, carefully, because Henry was always careful, how she was feeling generally, not just about the office, generally. She thought about it. She told him, better, genuinely better, not the same as before, but I've stopped wanting that. I don't want to go back to exactly before. I want to go forward to something that's been built out of this. Henry nodded. Lucy looked at her with the look that was 15 years old between them but felt, in this moment, new, like she was seeing something she had been waiting to see. Good, Lucy said. Yes, Claire said. I think so. She drove home at 10. The September evening was cool and clear. She parked in the well-lit spot she had taken to always using, not out of fear now, but out of habit, and she had decided that some habits formed in difficult times were worth keeping, simply because they were practical. She walked to the front door with her keys in her hand. She went inside. She made a cup of tea. She stood at her kitchen window and looked at the city below. The city was doing what it always did. Its ordinary, massive, indifferent business. Lights and windows. Motion in the streets. The whole enormous apparatus of people living their lives, making their decisions, encountering each other in doorways and at parties and on pavements, not knowing most of the time what any of it would lead to. She thought about the rooftop on Ashfield Lane. The October night, 2 years ago. The string lights and the city spread out in every direction. She thought about the woman she had been that night, careful and contained and slightly guarded, warming up to the room slowly, knowing what she liked and moving toward it. She thought about how that woman, without any of this, was already worth something, was already good. She thought about how she had almost not gone. She thought about everything that had followed. She thought about what she knew now. She knew that the desire to be deeply seen by someone was not a weakness. It was one of the most human things there was. It was the thing that connected people to each other across all the ordinary distance. The vulnerability in it was not the problem. The vulnerability was the point. What mattered was not eliminating it. You could not eliminate it without eliminating the possibility of anything real, but learning to move with it carefully. To let it be present without letting it move faster than understanding. She knew that trust was not a thing you either had or didn't. It was a thing you extended in proportion to what a person had shown you. That proportion was the key. Not withholding, not overextending. Proportion. She knew that the people who had shown up for her, Nina, Patrick, Lucy, Gordon, Elaine, even Diane at the lunch table in May, had shown her something important about what genuine investment looked like, as opposed to the performed version. She could feel the difference now in a way she had not been fully able to before, not with suspicion, not with constant monitoring, but with the simple, functional ability to read what was actually there rather than what she was hoping to find. She knew that she was not finished, that the particular care with which she now moved through some things was not a flaw or a failure. It was the appropriate response to something that had happened, and it would change gradually, over time, as more time and more good evidence accumulated. She was not in a hurry. She was not afraid of the slowness. She knew that the lamp being off was not the absence of something. It was the presence of something else, something her nervous system had slowly and carefully concluded she was allowed to have. She stood at the window with her tea and she looked at the city. She was 30 years old. She had her work and her friends and her family, and the notebook with the list of places she had finally opened again in the spring. And she had added 3 new places to the list since then. She had the new office with its good light and the running route along the river. She had the sessions with Elaine once a month, and the dinners at Lucy's table, and the Saturday mornings with Patrick at the coffee place on the corner. She had the small and stubborn machinery of her own life, which she had built, and which had survived, and which was, she understood now without apology, genuinely hers. It was not the life she had expected. It was not what she would have planned, if she had been able to plan it. But it was real, and it had been earned, and it was large enough to have more things come into it, in time, when she was ready. When the proportions were right. She finished her tea. She washed the cup. She went to her bedroom. She changed. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark, in the September night, and she listened to the city outside, and the particular quiet of her own room, and she let both of them be what they were. She did not check her phone. She did not reach for it. She lay in the dark with her hands still at her sides and she breathed, evenly and without effort, and inside the breathing was nothing she needed to manage, and nothing she needed to protect, and nothing she needed to perform. Just herself. Whole. In the morning she would get up and run. She would make coffee and drive to the east side and open the door of the new office for the first time with her own key, and stand at the window and look at the city she had known all her life. She would begin the work that was waiting for her, which was good work, work she had chosen and was capable of, and would not be taken from her. She would call Nina at lunch. She would text Lucy a photograph of the view from the window. She would stop at the bakery near the old quarter on the way home, because there was a particular thing they made there on Fridays that she had been meaning to try for months. She would do all of it. But first, she slept. She slept the way she had always slept before any of it, fully, deeply, without the lamp, without one ear open for a sound. The city held its noise outside the window. The September dark was complete. She was in it, and she was fine, and she was already moving, even in sleep, toward the morning.